Amen. I wanted to take this hour and remind us of things that we know and perhaps some things that we have forgotten. And I wanted to take the theme of the hour, John 15 and verse 12 and 13. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. I wanted to just share with you as a reminder the loss of life that day. The United States war with militant Islamic terror began 23 years ago today. On September the 11th, 2,973 people perished in an unprovoked attack on our nation. Add to that the date, to this date, the United States war on terror also cost 7,078 American military men and women their lives. Another thought that goes with that is that 23 years ago we witnessed the horror of 9/11 as live newscast beamed the attacks against the citizens of our nation to the world. You've noticed the teenagers are not in here tonight. They are having their own 9/11 upstairs. And Pastor Peterman is giving them history and background that most of our crowd here tonight, we don't need to be told. We lived through it. But we realize as we talked this past week that we have a whole generation that doesn't remember why. They just merely remember the war. If you would, allow me to walk you through just some thoughts with this. You and I, most of us, watched as two passenger jets were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11, with 76 passengers, 11 crew members, and 5 hijackers, crashed into the World Trade Center's North Tower, instantly killing all passengers aboard the plane and trapping the World Trade Center's employees above the 91st floor. They all would perish. At 9:03 a.m., the United Airlines Flight 175, with 51 passengers, 11 crew members, and 5 hijackers, struck the 77th to the 85th floor of the World Trade Center's South Tower. The World Trade Center towers are symbols, or were, of American capitalism, and they were engulfed in flames. How many of you were able to watch that morning? You got, wow, almost all of us. So we got the phone call, and immediately, most of us probably spent the day glued to what was unfolding in our nation. If you allow me to read rather than just speak extemporaneously, men and women working in the towers found their escape from the building blocked by rubble, flames, and smoke. And we watched in horror as many began to leap from the windows to escape the flames. At 9:37 a.m., American Airlines Flight 77, flying at 530 miles per hour, was flown into the Pentagon as Muslim terrorists attacked now the symbol of America's military might. 64 people on the plane died. 125 perished in the Pentagon. Sheila and I had the opportunity many years ago to tour the Pentagon, and they have a 9/11 memorial inside the Pentagon, exactly where the plane went into the building there. At 9:59 a.m., 56 minutes after impact, the South Tower collapsed. At 10:28 a.m., 1 hour and 42 minutes after impact, the North Tower collapsed. Both towers were reduced to a pile of dust and rubble within seconds. It's something I did not know, that the fires of the World Trade Center would burn for another 99 days. The jet fuel and other combustible elements that were in the building. At 10:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 93 crashed into an open field next to a wooded area in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, southeast of Pittsburgh. Passengers aboard the jet, having learned about the World Trade Center and Pentagon crashes, resisted the hijackers. You heard the words, "Let's roll." Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was on Guantanamo Bay, I don't know if he's still in prison there. He was the principal architect of the 9/11 attacks. He testified that the United States Capitol was the target for that plane. At 10:28 a.m., number 7 World Trade Center, a 47-story building adjacent to the Twin Towers, collapsed from fires that started inside as a result of the flames in the other buildings. And then I wanted to go through and make observations with you tonight. And it is that our nation and world are facing an enemy, born of a religion that hates life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that's declared in our Declaration of Independence. The tragedy of our withdrawal from Afghanistan is that there's a generation of Afghan people now that are enslaved. A whole generation of young girls that are growing up having to wear burqas from head to toe. At 6th grade, they're no longer allowed to have an education. And the oppression of Islam has enslaved a whole generation of women. That's the legacy of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It really is, even though much is not said about it. Islam, I wanted to talk to you about that for a few moments. Islam, and if you've ever read the Quran, have any of you ever read through the Quran? Okay, I have as well. Islam is a religion that calls for death and destruction of all who do not embrace Allah as its God. There's no compromise with militant Islamic people, none at all. Their outlook is either you will die or you will bow. But you do not compromise and you do not negotiate with a rabid, militant Islamic religion. It doesn't mean that we hate Muslims. It's just the opposite. My heart sorrows that they're enslaved to a religion of hate. For 14 centuries, a little bit of a background, militant Muslims have brought violence and sorrow into the world. The God of Islam never speaks of love and forgiveness in the Quran. Are you aware of that? Tonight, I opened the service with one of many passages of Scripture that talks about love. But you can search the Quran and you will not find anything about Allah loving, nor will you find anything about forgiveness. The followers of Muhammad have brought terror and oppression to nations, and they will not rest until they have either vanquished their foes or died a martyr. There's no middle ground with militant Islam. And continuing, the events of 9/11 did not make heroes, but revealed the heroic qualities expected of first responders. I've read the stories, and you have too, but I also remember watching that day as the fire trucks, fire engines, were rushing towards the tower, and the people pouring out of those buildings, and knowing that there were policemen and firemen that were climbing the stairs of a burning building. I've often wondered, had they known that those buildings would collapse the way they did, would they have gone in the way they did? And I don't know what the answer to that would be. But they went into harm's way while others were rushing out from it. And so as I thought about that, I thought of this here, and that is, as men and women escaped the towers, first responders rushed into those buildings that became their graves. Do you remember waiting for the body count, for the bodies to be brought out? And we waited and we waited. And it's like, where are all those people? Where are the bodies? And they were just pulverized into dust, most of them, by the crushing weight of the towers. And then the question, who are the men and women worthy of emulating? Our culture has a twisted sense of values. Let me share with you my thoughts on that. Who are the ones that are worthy of emulating? Well, I would suggest they're not men that rush for touchdowns, but the men and women who rush to a burning building or an automobile accident, risking their own lives. They're not athletes wearing gold chains and medallions, but men and women wearing badges on their uniforms. The men and women worthy of emulating are not politicians or pop stars riding in limousines, but officers driving vehicles that promise to protect and serve. Heroes not only risk their lives in duty, but they give their lives to save others. Some thoughts with that. Christ taught that to give one's life for a loved one is a noble deed. This verse I read at the beginning, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. And friends, there could be family as well. But then I thought about to die for a stranger, though. Isn't that extraordinary? That's what the first responders did at 9/11. They were rushing into a building to save lives of people they did not know. And so we read in Romans 5, 7, and 8 these words, "For scarcely or hardly for a righteous or just man will one die," that is, die in his place. "Yet peradventure for a good man some would even dare to die. But God commendeth his love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." When I was just putting my thoughts together, I came to this conclusion. Isn't Jesus Christ the ultimate first responder? Just think about that for a minute. The model and the example that he has given us. And then to add some other thoughts to that. So to die for an unrighteous, undeserving person is nothing short of grace. I think we often use the term grace without really pausing and really thinking about the concept of God's divine grace. 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 15, we find that Christ is the model of the first responder. We read these words, "This is a faithful saying and worthy of all acceptation, that Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners." And Paul then says, "Of whom I am the least deserving, of whom I am chief." And then another thought, he died for sinners, even though we were undeserving of God's love. We sometimes think that love is something that somebody has to earn, right? They've got to earn my love. That's an expression you hear. Aren't you glad that our Heavenly Father doesn't say you have to earn my love, but He says, "I have chosen to love you." And then a thought that goes with that, Romans 5, verse 9 and 10. "Much more then, being now justified by His blood, we shall be saved from wrath and judgment through Him. For if when we were enemies," think about that, enemies of God, and yet we were reconciled to God by the death of His Son, much more, being reconciled, we shall be saved by His life. I wanted to give you an opportunity to give a thought or a word of testimony, how this impacted you. And there might be some here that were more impacted than others. I remember the Dargolts, Patty Dargolts, the World Trade Center, she went through that every day. They had moved down here by the time of 9/11, but every day she would take a train into New York City and go into and through the World Trade Center to come out the other side. And I remember how she was just struck by the fact that many who perished were probably people that she passed every day, going and coming, each on their own journey. But could I give you an opportunity tonight, before I close with this verse? Maybe you'll share a thought, a testimony, a verse, a reflection on our nation. Anyone? Yeah. And if you speak up, your voice will hit this microphone and you'll travel all over.
Well, thank you for your patriotism. It almost brings me to tears to watch it. I work with a lady, and she shared to me, with me today, that the ripple effects of it is tremendous. She lived in Washington, D.C. when this happened, and her mom lived in Florida. And after that occurred, her mom kept urging her to come down and live with her in Florida because she was concerned for her safety. And she was here. And, so the ripple effects of what happened still remains to today. People are in fear somewhat of what happened. And that just kind of hit me today. Also, they do a ceremony at the World Trade Center where they name every person that was lost in the Trade Center. It's a 4-hour stream online, and she was watching that today.
That happened today?
Every year it's done. So, yeah, it's just it's a rough situation.
Yeah. Somebody else? Yeah.
I was more grateful that you literally said exactly what it was. My mom was working at Target, and I was on the phone with my mother. I had just gotten married 4 days before 9/11 occurred, and I was crying on the phone with my mom. "Oh my goodness, we're under attack. What's going to happen?" And she said, "Do not be afraid." And prayed with me on the phone. We were on the phone all the way up till the Pentagon was actually hit. So for hours, she was on the phone with me, serving people, making their avocado toast and whatever in the bakery. And I just appreciate. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I also marvel because I believe that moment changed so much in America of how we view one another, and it really brought us together, because at that moment we all became shades of wheat rather than black and white.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful time afterwards, where we appreciated one another for the love that we showed rather than, what history had unfortunately, shown us.
But I remember thinking, we have lived through our December 7th, the attack on Pearl Harbor. Somebody else. Yeah, Dave? Who was in the building? Oh, was he? Yes, right. He was in the Pentagon when it was attacked. Bob Scott was a pianist here at Hillsdale, and during COVID he developed Alzheimer's and passed away. But yeah, I had forgotten about that. Appreciate you reminding me of that, Dave.
All work that day for some reason.
Yeah.
But he is not working.
Yeah. Pentagon is a huge building. I don't know if you've ever toured it. It's huge. It's just an incredible building. Yeah, back in the back.
So we were actually stationed in Germany.
Can you say it a little bit louder?
Sorry. We were actually stationed in Germany at the time.
Oh.
And I went over to my friend's house, and she always had on the news. And I glanced over, and I saw one of the towers on fire on the television. And I just casually mentioned to her, I think there's something going on here. And she turned up the volume, and we watched the other plane fly into the building. Immediately, we were military, and we knew, that
Yeah.
it was an attack.
So were you living on a military base?
Yes, we were
So
stationed.
high alert
We
immediately.
immediately went to red, everything was shut down.
Yeah.
Parents couldn't get to their children at schools on other bases. We couldn't get to our grocery store because it was across the street, and we had to go off and back on. Our husbands were out in the field, and they were all on alert. They had to go and get briefed immediately, and we already knew that there was going to be deployments.
Wow.
So, yeah, and then we lived in complete shutdowns for days. And after that, we were always very terrified to go out into the economy and, just interact in Europe. And a couple of my friends were actually accosted in Europe.
Wow.
So just for being American, they hated us over there. So, they knew.
Interesting that, from being on a military base there and all that.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah, they shut down.
Wow. Yeah. Do any of you remember President Bush when he left, was it Sarasota area? And that no one knew where his plane had gone. Do you remember that? Because the United States did not know where the next attack was, but there was a concern that he would be a target of it. And so, Air Force One just went off everybody's radar. No one had any idea of where where Air Force One had gone to. Somebody else. We have about 5 more minutes. Yeah.
Jim and I got to go for lunch at Mission Barbecue, and I was encouraged that the one we went to, there was a bagpiper that played Amazing Grace, and they actually paused to remember and did a live Star Spangled Banner, and it was encouraging that there are still those remnants.
Oh yeah. Well, you can go into Missions Barbecue. Have most of you gone to Missions Barbecue? Yeah, it's kind of a, all the military guys are in there, and the police, the firemen. It's very much a great barbecue, but it's very much interesting. I think it was Jim or Rick, I don't know. I think it was Jim I was talking to. First time I was there at 12 o'clock, and at 12 o'clock, boy, you stand up and you sing the national anthem at Missions Barbecue. I absolutely love that. Anybody else? Yeah, Jim.
That morning, I worked at WSRE, a public broadcasting station, came in at 8:35, somewhere around there, and things had already started to happen. Every station, every television in the facility was on the same channel. Usually with satellite feeds, we had 20, 30 different,
Right.
everything was on the same channel. We all saw that. We stood in silence around. And for the next couple of weeks, we were playing things on air that we'd never done before, with hymns, and Bible verses and things. But after a while, it kind of slipped away. Our country had flags out the next few weeks, and that all slipped away. And it seems like we lose sight of those very important times.
Yeah, if and when we're attacked again, I think we will be. It makes me nervous about the character of our nation today, even compared to 20 years ago. And I have a prophecy. I'm not a prophet, but I do think that there are pockets of terrorists all across our nation, in all of the major cities. And I think there will be inevitably a coordinated attack on our nation. And I think that is going to happen. I'm not sure when, but, yeah.
I worked for Chase when that happened.
You were where?
At Chase, working at my desk.
Oh, yeah?
I was watching that part. And I ended up having a trip up to the people that I worked with in New York City a couple of weeks later. And as was my habit, I would walk around in the evening when I was on those kind of trips. And I walked all the way around the perimeter of that whole area, walking past the cars that were abandoned with the ash on them, and I came across 2 or 3 different memorials from that people were putting up. You've seen the pictures of them. The couple of different churches that were doing things to provide food for the fire, the crew, the responders.
Hillside actually sent a team up there with water and food and all to New York City during that time. Anybody else? Yeah. Jen?
I'm a slightly different demographic, but I was in 2nd grade when it happened, and I went to a tiny little country school way out in the country, and we listened to it on the radio just because that's the only thing we had in the school. And my mom was a teacher there. I just remember a teacher coming into our room and pulling the teacher out for a minute, and then she came back and some parents were stopping, and being so confused why all the teachers were. We got pulled into the auditorium, and they had the radio on, and then the principal kind of explained it to us. But then we got sent home early. We were really close to one of the largest air force bases in the country, and there was a lot of fear. Even I remember hearing the teachers talk about they attack us next.
Yeah.
Because it's all within those couple hours of it, and so they sent us all home. And I just remember being so confused, but dumb as a child, being excited that we got the day off. And it wasn't until later, when I was a little bit older, realizing what it even was. But that was scary.
One lasting memory I have is some of you wouldn't remember Marcy Brokaw. Some of you do. Marcy was a secretary in our office at the old location. She had terminal cancer at the time. Actually had like a chemo type thing that she carried with her, had a pump and all. And she insisted on working for us right almost up to the time that she was bedridden. But it was during this time that she was watching. We let her have a TV. We actually ended up getting a recliner in the office that she could go and take her radiation treatment and such. But I remember her watching the news. I don't know why that sticks in my memory, but I remember just her being glued to that. And she was a wonderful lady. She just a dear friend of ours. Yeah, Randy. I'll let Randy, you'll be the last one, and I'll have you close us in prayer.
Okay. Well, I woke up this morning, and as everyone else, we were confronted with the fact it's 9/11.
Yeah.
And I began reflecting on that early, and the question I posed to myself is, what does it mean to never forget? We're called to do that. Sometimes it shows up as a moment of silence, singing the national anthem, But what does it really mean to never forget? To me, it means to be resolved, to be aggressively resistant towards what caused it the last time, to be valiant for the truth in our own country. And like you, I fear that our posture has diminished over the years. And we say never forget, but I fear that many have forgotten. And action will speak to that matter in days to come. And I just pray that by the grace of God, we will truly behave like we never forgot.
Well, and I think for us as believers, our society has lost a lot of character. I'm just going to say men have been feminized by this culture. And I think you see that everywhere. I believe that we as believers really are the backbone of our nation. We may not be able to be the dam that holds back evil, but we certainly are part of God's plan. And before Randy prays, would you quote this with me? If my people,
which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land.
Randy,